revolution is taking place around the globe. Clean energy is generating hundreds of billions in economic activity across the world. In order for India to ensure its global leadership in the area of renewable energy, we are required to take some responsible actions right now in the field of solar, wind, biomass, nuclear, and all the other sectors of renewable energy. So catching the tide early, Open Media Network has come up with the second edition of the Power Summit, titled Clean Energy in Synergy with the Environment. Our event today is powered by CESC, and our knowledge partner for the event are TERI. So join me in welcoming the esteemed panelists for today's event. Mr. R.R. Rashmi, who's a distinguished fellow and program director from TERI. Mr. Prabir Niyogi, Chief Advisor, Corporate Affairs from R.P. Sanjeev Goenka Group. Dr. R.P. Singh, ex-CMD, Power Grid, and currently an independent board of director at Azure Power. Dr. Harish Ahuja, who's the founder and CEO of Indiagosolar. Mr. Rajiv Das, Deputy General Manager, CESC. I welcome you all for this panel discussion. To take the discussion forward, I now hand over the session to Mr. R.R. Rashmi, who is the moderator for today's event. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Priya, and thanks to all the panelists for joining this discussion today. COVID has presented us with an unprecedented global health crisis, and this is also likely to affect the pace of investments and the growth that has taken place in the renewable energy sector in the past few years. One of the challenges before us is that we not only restore the economic growth impulses that have suffered in the wake of COVID global health crisis, but also that we continue the momentum towards energy transitions which are taking place across the world, and more so in developing countries like India, where this is not just a matter of simple energy transition but also of energy security. Invite the panelists for a discussion on some of the key issues that we have decided for today's discussion. Let me begin today's discussion by asking the first question to Mr. Prabir Niyogi. Given the fact that the government has a goal of achieving 450 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030, or possibly in the medium term around that timeline, what do you think that the industry and the government will need to do to move in this direction, given the resource constraints and the challenges in the context of COVID crisis that has enveloped the Indian economy?
Mr. Rashmi, thank you for the introduction, and thanks to Open Media as well, to have organized this very contemporary topic at this opportune time when we are possibly coming out of the COVID crisis, the journey having just begun. Yes, Mr. Rashmi, basically to put it in context, if you are looking at 450 gigawatts of capacity, renewable energy capacity up to, let's say, 2029-30, in fact, that's also the projections. They have suggested that in terms of solar and wind taken together, it would comprise about 52% of more than 800 gigawatts of total capacity India would be needing by 2029-30. So let's try to understand where we are and where we want to be. Firstly, if we have to reach that magic figure of 450 gigawatts, and we are at somewhere around 90 gigawatts today. So, it means a renewable energy capacity addition of 36 gigawatts per annum, 360 in total. And our moving average in the last 3 years is just about 10 to 11 gigawatts. So that's a scale we are looking at. Now, in terms of investments, there is a BNEF study, and they have said that if you have to create that capacity of 450 gigawatts, Then in solar and wind itself, you would need $180 billion of investment. And in order to support the transmission and distribution infrastructure, you would need somewhere around $335 billion. Now, our investment so far, cumulative, have been $50 billion in renewable energy in order to create the capacity of 90 gigawatts. So there is another dimension of scale to be achieved in terms of investments to be brought in. And thirdly, which is quite critical, at least in terms of solar capacity, 80% of our solar cells and modules are still imported from China. And the dichotomy also is that the Chinese solar panels are as much as 30% cheaper than our own domestic modules. Now, how do we now move on from here? Obviously, we have to create a domestic manufacturing base. Otherwise, achieving the scale of 450 gigawatts of renewable energy is going to be difficult, if not impossible. So, post-COVID, the policy certainty, the regulatory framework has to evolve. And this would basically focus on fiscal incentives. So what kind of capital subsidy, what kind of interest subventions we are bringing in order to support domestic manufacturing. Two, the factors of production, all too known to us, are to improve. Land, labor, logistics, power, the availability. So that has to improve. Third, there has to be a regime of accelerated approvals. And fourth, finance. How do we organize the finance? And it must go beyond priority sector lending by banks to prioritized financing by FIs, by institutions, by pension and insurance funds, by sovereign wealth funds. How does it happen? This happens if and only if we move on to the regime of green bonds and ESG finance. That's how the rate of interest will be addressed. A. B. There will be public comfort. We are not investing in projects which are climate adverse. They are in fact climate friendly. So we are taking care of physical and transition risks. And last but not the least, if we have to have this kind of institutional finance, the organizations on their part have to relook at their reporting and disclosure arrangements. And this would, to my mind, we haven't addressed it as an industry, as an economy. We have to look very seriously at triple bottom line reporting, and which is again ESG compliant. Now, it doesn't end with finance. See, if we have to make, the B is, how do we now make projects happen? We make projects happen by improving the execution skills, by developing, a skill-based labor. So a lot of apprenticeship training is required, but more importantly, we cannot afford to have, as at present, 8 gigawatts of projects stranded. Why are they stranded? I'm sorry?
Yes, Mr. Nyogi, I'll have to bring it to a conclusion so that we can go to the other panelists.
Yes, so this is my last point. So we can ill afford to have projects stranded. And why are they stranded is because A, the PPAs are not being done, although the projects have materialized in terms of having bidded out. And B, the transmission capacity is again found wanting. So A, as I said, we have to improve the domestic manufacturing base, and B, we have to make projects happen and make them happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nyogi. You talked about infrastructure constraints, the domestic manufacturing constraints, and it's interesting that you have referred also to the financing issues, the issue of green bonds, how we can direct much more investment. That is going to be really a critical issue in the years to come. But infrastructure and the domestic manufacturing is now really the key in the context of Atmanirbhar Bharat and the challenges on solar panel imports that are taking place. The government has already announced its intention to raise the tariff on solar panel imports. So that is going to be a major challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Rashmi, for allowing me to speak on this important point. I think Mr. Neogi made all the important points, be it on arranging the finance, creating the infra capacities, building the institutions. But the last point which he made is very important. I'd like to re-emphasize that. Though SECI, Solar Energy Corporation of India, has signed the agreement with the IPPs, GENCOs, for putting 8 gigawatt of solar capacity, but they are not finding the suitable discoms to sign back to that PPA. And this is the biggest issue. I mean, the markets are giving clear signals that this top-level policymaker approach of putting 450 gigawatt is not in sync with the consumer-centric approach, because ultimately in B2G space, distribution companies are our main consumers, and if distribution companies are not ready to sign PPA, I think we need to look into this aspect critically. And I think in the next questions, I'll try to elaborate more on this. But I think this is one of the most important points we should not miss. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ahuja and Mr. Neogi once again. Now let me turn to Mr. R.P. Singh. Given his experience in the energy transmission sector and also the fact that he has led the power grid for such a long time, I would like to ask you, Mr. Singh, we have been able to create a momentum for a renewable energy sector in India. Capacity has been created. It has almost jumped 10 times from what it was about 10 years ago. So there has been a positive growth. But do you think this growth will sustain itself? Because there are challenges of its integration into the grid, and there are, of course, other financing and manufacturing challenges which Mr. Neogi has referred to. But I would like you to focus on the challenges of renewable energy getting integrated into the grid. What are your recommendations for overcoming this challenge? And do you think some kind of a new policy innovation is required here to keep this momentum going?
Biggest hurdle which power grid faced was in establishing of Talcher Kolar transmission system, longest in the Asia. I'm talking of 98, 99 and all that. Mr. Kumar Mangalam was my minister. Vajpayee ji was prime minister. We did nuclear testing in Pokhran. World Bank was financing this project, sanctions were imposed. Everybody started crying, what will happen, this will happen, that will happen. Then they said, Mr. Singh, how are you going to implement this project? I was summoned by PM, I said, I'll do it. They said, there is no finance. How are you going to do? I said, I'll do it. Because India as such, let me tell you, to you, you may not like it, India has never been a poor country. Our mentality is poor. We always think in negative terms. I said, I'll do it, I'll finance it from Indian bankers. Then they said that, look here, there are many hurdles in determining the prices of supply, erection, because there used to be some government relaxation on excise duties, sales tax, blah, 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 blah. I said, no issue. It is a need of India that we must transport surplus power from eastern region to southern region. We arranged the money, made payments. By the time this project was commissioned, World Bank sanctions were lifted, and we did this project in 33 months against a schedule of 42 months and saved 700 crores rupees in project execution. The point is that, look here, we should always look at positive. I am working as an independent director with Azure. I see how professionally they are working at it, looking at it and all that. Now, they also come out with problems. This will happen, that will. The only problem in this country is how to make payments to the suppliers, in the sense distribution company. That is the basic fundamental issue, nothing else. There is no other issue. And how to make people as a participant in development of power sector. The tragedy is we talk in air-conditioned offices, be it ministers, be it bureaucrats, be it technocrats, be it professionals, be it private, be it public. Because we are accustomed of sitting in and of discussing in air-conditioned office. Who wants that a private person living in a village should be participant in our decision making? Nobody. They are simply ignored. Based on this premises, I am going to discuss the topic, of constraints in transmission system and how to facilitate solar. Now, let us talk what is our energy resource available with us. When we began with NTPC and NHPC, no financier was prepared to take up hydro projects. Then the birth of NTPC came, success story of NTPC came. Today, people talk about hydro projects. People talk about nuclear projects. Let me tell you what is our performance on these two fronts, nuclear and hydro. I don't want to go into debate. If I talk on this and I talk the inner stories, it will take months and years. How we have bugged up. On thermal side and gas side, where is the coal available with us? If it is available, where is water available? Where is land available with us? What is the kind of pollution we are having? What are R&R issues? Nobody talks about it. People say that non-conventional energy is costlier. We are giving transmission subsidy, especially for interstate transmission and all that. A huge lobby is coming up from thermal side that look here, we are dying because you are giving subsidy on ISTS. Therefore, solar is becoming cheaper or wind is becoming cheaper. Now the issue is the one has to realize what are energy resources available right on our table. Nothing. Coal, if it is there is no water. Who is going to answer the pollution front? And how many of us, I think Mr. Neogi must be, he is confined to Calcutta and all that. I have traveled and I am traveling even today, every nook and corner of the country. I see the plight of the thermal power plants, the way they are creating pollution. It is a serious issue. There is no drinking water. What the hell we are talking about? So these are the issues. Based on this, let me come to as to how are we going to create infrastructure for the non-conventional energy sector. The reason being, we need non-conventional energy. That is the only God-gifted resource available with us. Whether we want to do or we don't want to do, we want to be cautious, we want to make money, don't want to make money, whether we want to politicalize or whatever it is there, these are the only resources with us, and the other is biomass. Biomass, it is not being promoted the way it should be promoted. It is a huge resource on our disposal, which I will address later on, Now, as far as transmission is considered, there are huge and cry that transmission lines will not come up matching with solar power plants or wind power plants. It is a true story. There was or is an institution called Power Grid. I am using deliberately this word, was or is. Where people don't want, the vested interest don't want that there should be success stories which work in the interest of the people of this country. तो हमारे यहाँ एक हिंदी में कहावत से आप सब लोग समझते हैं कि गरीब की गाय जब बच्चा देती है तो गांव भर के लोग अपना पूरा लेकर के बर्तन लेकर दूध के लिए पहुंच जाते हैं, वो गरीब को दूध नहीं मिलता. So that is the tragedy of this country. We don't celebrate successes, we try to condemn successes. We will go with negative mind. Now, as far as national grid is concerned, it is in place. Very strong, resilient national grid. You have seen it on 5th April, I don't remember the date, whether it was 5th or 9th April, 9%. We had to stop power for 15 minutes or something like that. There was a lot of hue and cry. I heard people talking, the grid will collapse, this will happen, that will happen. When I was sick of listening this, then I put it on the Facebook. No, our grid is so strong. We have all most modern low dispatch centers. We have trained people. It will not collapse. You go ahead. I talked to Secretary Power. He welcomed it, and we put. The rest you all know. What is needed is the whole solar, wind, and biogas has to be reorganized. One, that you set up big projects, huge projects. The other is distributed generation. If you set up huge projects, you have to strengthen or fill in the blanks or fill in the missing links in the national grid, which will be minor in nature, not major. You have to strengthen state grids and local grids. There again, you can reduce these requirements and your infrastructure cost will come down. Transmission cost will not be as much as, or distribution cost as we are projecting. We have to go for distributed generation. So therefore, state grids and all that, and national grid, if you want to reduce the burden, you want grid security, we have to go for distributed generation and with microgrid. What will be the advantage of this? One, your resources will come down, your fund requirements will come down, people participation will come. Instead of giving subsidy later on, you give upfront subsidy to the weaker section. Make them parts owner, a sense of ownership, and tell them you operate it, but we will govern you. So there has to be a strong governance. So that is how. And another advantage will be that you don't have to bother for the agriculture sector and village sector. Focus all these big projects to supply power to big cities, big commercial establishment, and big industry. They will also be happy. Your transmission cost will go down. The risk of collapsing of your system will be reduced. So a lot of vulnerability will go. Now, in putting up distributed generation, what you need is you have to go for blockchain arrangements. In the sense, the economy should be totally, it should be working. It should not be losing, but because somebody doesn't have power and somebody has surplus power and all that. To bring economy, we have to go for blockchain arrangements. And then the other thing is that we have to have local load dispatch center, which will not cost much of money. It will promote local industry, water problem will be resolved, and your pollution will go out, and then you have to supplement solar and wind, if it is there, wind is there, supplement with biogas. Enough biogas can be generated if you have your dairy farms, etc., etc. And that biomass can generate power through feeding gas turbines. Because I'm advocating digesting system, not burning of biomass. That is what the solution is. And since time is short, I will not be able to cover whatever I have to say. But let me tell you, this will promote employment in villages. This will promote local small industry. We can play a very big role in reviving our economy. India doesn't live in Delhi, doesn't live in Mumbai, and should not live. We are aggregation society. We have to go back to our villages and make them partner in progress, including generation and distribution of power, and they will happily do it. I think I'm clear.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Singh Saab. Thank you very much for for your optimism. You have great faith in the system that it will be able to mobilize the required finances for development of the renewable energy. You believe that there is no dearth of finance. This is true in a way. I mean, for the managerial skills, the mobilization of resources, this also depends on the business skills. But at the same time, the resource, there is enough liquidity in the system. But question is how to make it attractive for the financial institutions and also for the investors to invest more in this sector, given the current threats. You refer to this threat from the coal sector, and you believe that the people who have invested in the coal sector, they don't want to let go of this their investments, and they are the ones who are standing in the way of integration of renewable energy or its further expansion. This is a challenge, but in fact, this is a question which I also wanted to ask other panelists. Is the threat really from the stranded assets in the coal sector, or is it something different? Mr. Singh believes that we can do a lot. Even we have the infrastructure, the grid capacity is very large.
I would like to start with certain numbers because it will clarify the situation on the ground. And I think all these seasoned panelists understand these numbers, but I need to re-emphasize upon this. So the current installed capacity in India is around 372 gigawatts. And if you see the share of renewable in this is around 35%, roughly around 125 gigawatt to 130 gigawatt. And the balance is thermal, coal, gas, large hydro, etc. Now, if you see the capacity distribution, renewable is contributing 35%, and fossil fuel is contributing around 65%. This is on capacity side, in gigawatt side. But when you see in terms of actual generation, which is roughly 1,300 billion units, the renewable is contributing around 90 to 20%. The balance 80% is coming still from the fossil fuel. And here the situation get clarified. I don't think, and this is my version, I don't think the stranded coal assets or a stranded natural gas asset, which are roughly in the range of 25 gigawatt, any kind of problem to renewable. But I think it's going to be a support to the existing renewable, because renewable bring a lot of variation in the generation in the daytime, during the season times, and this standard asset, be it coal or natural gas, can combine with solar or wind and can create a base load, and they can bring the variation to lowest possible level. And I like to again complement this with the numbers of COVID times. This will understand why I'm making this point, that the standard coal or natural gas assets are not a burden on the economy, but some or other way they will complement the increasing capacity of renewable in the coming times. So if you see the distribution of load among the four top categories of consumer, one is residential. Residential consumers are consuming around 27% of the power generation. Agriculture is consuming around 17%. Industry roughly 45 to 46%, and commercial around 8.5 to 9.5%. And surprisingly, 23rd March post-lockdown, the load went down almost 40%. And here I echo the thoughts of Mr. R.P. Singh that our grid was resilient. I mean, such a variation, it absorbed very well. And again, when gradually the load came back to the normal level, again, the grid was very resilient. It absorbed the load very well. So I think our grid is very strong. In spite of all this variation in residential, industrial, commercial loads, the grid could absorb this shock. So it's not about solar or wind day duration or seasonal duration loads. It is also how the consumption is decreasing and increasing, and it is absorbing it. And since I've cited a very good example of 9th April, the candle march by all the people across India for 10 minutes, and grid was resilient. But the most important point I'm going to make is right now, if you could see the fact, the Nomura report, which is one of the largest research company or the Bank of the Japan, has predicted that power demand has come back to the normal level as per the last year. So our power demand of this year is again approaching around 1250 billion units to 1350 billion units. It has touched the last year level. So what does it show? Half of the industries are working at half the capacity. Most of the commercial sector is working at 80% of the capacity, except residential and agriculture. Virtually all other sector is working at almost 50 to 60% of capacity, but demand has gone back. So this country has demand. One very important fact this number side is the base load is increasing because most of the people are working from home. Right now, this conference is happening working from home. So base load is shifting. So against the 27% of the residential load, now this is moving to around 45%. So base load importance will increase because people will be working from home at least for next 18 months. So the standard coal and thermal asset would be a key asset to give top layer of base load. So these are not, so I'm not asking your, I'm not denying your question that would they give the right price signal or right financing signal or right commercial signal. I'm giving the fact here that these are not a standard asset, these are useful asset for top of this base load with solar or wind or biomass. Would I answer your question, Mr. Rashmi, or you like to follow up question on this?
Thank you very much for your clarification, Mr. Ahuja. I mean, you believe that, you have shown it by the data that the coal sector is actually stabilizing the grid and it is helping meet the spike in the demand for residential energy. In fact, it was Mr. R.P. Singh who raised the issue that there is the coal-fired power stations and the investments made in that sector, they constitute a threat to the further progress of renewable energy. But I do take your point. I think you can go ahead.
Yeah. So the last but not the least point, which is very important to understand, that I think, so I'm a testimony of this entire journey. So I used to be a bureaucrat, then I came to corporate sector, and now I'm working my own business, which is the B2C solar e-commerce marketplace, where we try to sell solar and EV products and projects like a commodity, you know. So I think India needs, which R.P. Singh Sir mentioned also, Mr. Neogi mentioned also, that India need a consumer-centric approach. लोगों की सुननी पड़ेगी, जनता की सुननी पड़ेगी, and distributed generation is the key ingredient. If people start contributing, I think Mr. Singh Saab said very well that India is not poor. It is the people who has poor mindset, I think. If people start believing in solar or people start believing in electric vehicles, there will be more and more investment at their level. They'll be investing on their rooftop, they'll be investing in the electric vehicle cars. A lot of finance can be mobilized, a lot of savings can be mobilized through them. I mean, the shortage of 180 billion, which Mr. Neogi pointed out, a large portion of which can be matched by people itself. If they start investing in solar or electric vehicle cars, it will stabilize both the grid side and the consumption side. One fact I like to state here, which is I think everybody knows here, India has started with 100 gigawatt solar capacity, 60 gigawatt on utility scale, 40 gigawatt on rooftop. If you see the present capacity of solar, it's around 42 gigawatt. Out of 42 gigawatt, 38 gigawatt has come on utility scale, and only 4 gigawatt has come on rooftop. So against the target, 70 to 80% capacity on utility scale solar has been achieved. But against the target in rooftop, only 10 to 20% has been achieved. I will not go into policy because I'm a believer, I'm an action-oriented person. I think people need to participate here. People should believe that this is their game, it is not the government game anymore. Solar has brought this point very clearly that we have to participate toward the sustainability, toward triple bottom line, what Mr. Yogi pointed out. We have to invest in solar, we have to invest in electric car, and try to contribute to reduction in fossil fuel. Living upon everything upon the government, on the policy maker, is not going to work. If you like to add more and more renewable, especially 450 gigawatt. One last fact with which I like to conclude my statement is India's present per unit consumption is only 1136 units. People say India is surplus in power, and this fact that 50% industry is down, 80% commercial is down. In spite of that, India has touched the last year consumption. It means India has shortage of power. Against 1136 per unit consumption of India, the global average is 2800 units. There is still at least 180% down from the global average. We need a lot of power, and people has to participate. We cannot leave everything on the government. And if we do it, I think coal and natural gas will not be standard asset, but they'll be useful asset to give a base load. This is my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ahuja. You are basically saying that there is a huge potential for further increase in the power demand in India, and renewable energy holds the promise that further increase in the investments and further increase in the generation of renewable energy is going to really fill this gap in the power demand, the rising potential. This is true in a large measure, and you pointed out to the difficulties or the inadequacies in meeting the targets as regards the solar rooftop vis-a-vis the utility scale projects. Even there are serious problems even on the utility or side, which is going to lead me to the next question about creating the manufacturing capacity within India, to which Mr. Yogi also referred to. Let me now turn to the fourth panelist for today's discussion, and I'll like to request him to address Mr. Rajiv Kumar Das, we talked about the manufacturing constraints, the solar panel imports from China. They're going to be costlier if the government is going to impose higher tariffs. But this is the government has set for itself a goal of Atmanirbhar or self-reliant India. So given this policy conundrum and the challenges that we face, how do you think we will really create the momentum for renewable energy and solar PV sector in India?
Yeah, thank you, Open Media. Previous speakers has covered a lot. You see, I will restrict myself from a distribution licensee point of view. There is solar potential of say 500 or 700 gigawatt in our country. And target is 450 by 2030. Till date, we have achieved target of 50% by 2022. Hopefully, we'll do some more. But this solar, I will restrict myself to solar only. Solar standalone capacity will be minimal. Most of the solar plants will be grid connected. Now here comes the distribution licensee. Unless these distribution licensees are encouraged to do it, it is very difficult to achieve the target. As Dr. Ahuja pointed out, that only 10 to 20% of rooftop, which is supposed to be connected to distribution grid, so only 10 to 20% we have achieved till date. Now we have some technical considerations from a distribution licensing point of view about intermittency, then power flow in multi-direction, etc., etc. We see some light by utilizing storage, though we have did a lot of studies on it. Till date, costs are more than the benefits. We are waiting for the cost to come down. Hopefully by 2025, we will see the cost benefits, and then we'll go for it. Another aspect to address, another point to address is there, possibility is there to go for demand response. For that, we need participation from the consumers as well as appropriate regulations by the Commission. There is a major point on commercial side as well. You see, tariff, retail tariff to our consumer, there is some demand charge or fixed charge as well as energy charge. Ideally, we should recover our fixed cost through demand charge to the consumers. But it is not happening. We only recover only 10 to 20% of our fixed cost through fixed charge. And balance goes to energy charge. That is why the energy charge is quite high to our consumers. What it means now, if we compare the energy cost from a solar, maybe rooftop or whatever, with the energy charge of distribution licensing that we are charging to our consumers, it is not fair. Because if there is some captive consumption or net metering, then the consumers who are cross-subsidizing, who are paying high energy charge, they are moving away. And the utility distribution company, they are losing a major portion of their, they are not recovering the full fixed cost. So that is a big challenge. That is one of the major concern for the distribution licenses not to encourage this solar. So that has to be addressed, that fixed cost to be recovered through the fixed charge as much as possible. In that case, then competition will see the real competition. So that is another point from the distribution licenses point of view. Then apart from that, there are studies by SIGRE, by IEEE on formation of global grid. You see, to enhance this renewable capacity, we need to have a larger grid, not only within the nation, but across the nation. Right now, we are connected with Bangladesh, then Bhutan, etc., etc. There is a program to go beyond. Then similar Euro grid or some North America grid are existing. And as I have seen that there are studies by SIGRE and IEEE for formation of global grid. So across the sea, across the continents. So once it happens, then we can go for 100% renewable across the globe by utilizing the wind at the Central Asia or Greenland, or the solar at Africa or Australia, whatever. So that grid has to be extended beyond the countries. So with that only we can achieve, renewables to that larger extent. Otherwise, so all the technical and commercial issues will remain. Thank you.
Mr. Das, thank you for being precise and economical and very focused with your thoughts. You have hit upon a very important question of the reforms in the retail tariff, the kind of restructuring of how we recover the costs from the consumers, and this is acting as a disincentive not only to the consumers but also to the discoms. You have essentially touched upon one of the remaining, or not the last issues in the discom reforms, but one of the central questions in the discom reforms which we need to bring in. So far we have only focused on the liquidity questions, but the structural questions we have not addressed. I would like to come back to Mr. Neogi. Given this presentation by Mr. Das and Mr. Ahuja, what do you think, what kind of restructuring we can bring about in the distribution companies? How do you think the present direction is good enough, or if not, then what are the additional measures which need to be taken? And then I'll come back to Mr. Ahuja and Mr. RPC.
Well, that's a good question, Mr. Reshmi, but I suspect that if we start with distribution reforms, we might end up spending the whole day. But still, I'll try to be precise. I'll try to be precise because Harish did, raise a very pertinent question of discoms just not signing up the PPAs, and there are larger issues. And I also take the cue from Mr. RP Singh when he flagged the context of distributed generation. Now, coming back to what Rajiv was saying, there is a valid point that how much of fixed charge and variable charge should be part of the retail tariff, how much of demand response should be incentivized. But for that, you would need a regime of dynamic pricing. You will need a regime of on-peak pricing. You would need a regime of critical peak pricing. Regrettably, the market is not ready yet. So, I'll combine what Harish and Rajiv said. Harish talked of customer centricity, and in fact, he expanded the theme to people centricity, and that is exactly what is lacking in distribution reforms. The second thing that...
Yeah, please. Right? Yeah.
Second thing, what is definitely lacking in distribution and why it's not improving is a lack of governance. So that's why we don't sign PPAs. We don't demonstrate our resource adequacy. We don't exercise our universal service obligations. So that's why we get away with what we are doing. That's number two. As far as distributed generation is concerned, again, Rajiv's point is very correct, because you will have to finally look at aggregating the distributed generation. So it's not merely rooftop solar, but also the demand side management, which have to be packaged and made to participate in wholesale markets. But that's again a bigger issue. Now, what Harish was saying was right. See that, the distribution companies are not entering into PPAs. They are shying away from it. Because, under USO, you don't have to demonstrate that you are fulfilling your obligations. You have the duty to supply, but I'm afraid you don't have the duty to serve. That's not explicit. That's number one. Now, again, coming back, I'll try to combine what Mr. RP Singh and Harish said. They're absolutely correct. Distributed generation will have a role. Microgrids will be part of it. But then the distribution reforms will also mean that the distribution company's business model has to change. And so the distribution, so far, we have seen the distribution company as a network operator. Now is the time to bring in the concept of distribution system, who will create the marketplace for distributed generation to participate on an equal basis with other resources, but based on cost-effective measures. And when it happens, we cannot always be in the realm of net metering. It creates an adverse impact, if not a disincentive, on distribution companies as because the DISCOMs are forced to pay for the power it procures at retail tariff, and that's not a fair proposition. So you will have to look at the mix of net and gross metering, more conveniently known as net billing, and when the load is beyond a threshold limit, the concept of gross metering will have to come in. I'll stop at that because this is a never-ending subject, and request you to take over and let other panelists to come.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Neogi, and thanks for this interesting and very enlightening input on this, because we need a mix of net and the gross metering to be able to help the DISCOMs and also push the reforms further. Mr. Ahuja, would you like to add something to this before I go to Mr. Singh?
I just like to connect here two things, When I say people centricity or public centricity, I just want to connect the wholesale market with the public sentiment on the power generation or power consumption. And let me connect here with Rajiv. In fact, I'm flagging this issue from last 6 months that post this 9 gigawatt not being signed by DISCOM, is it the time to think of energy only markets? Should we change our wholesale market concept from capacity-based bidding to energy-based bidding? And this will connect both distribution side and generation side. And tell me how. India has existing capacity of 372 gigawatt. Our peak load is only 198, 197 gigawatt. There's sufficient additional available capacity of around 180 gigawatt. So even if you stop capacity-based bidding today, I'm not talking about estimated capacity or low PL effect right now. Let me take facts as on record. 372 installed capacity versus 190 gigawatt of peak load. There's enough available capacity. Now we should move from capacity-based bidding to energy-based bidding. And the moment you move to energy-based bidding, people or distribution company directly participate. Because if the DISCOM, based on their aggregated next 3 years demand, don't requisition to the central government or MNRE, SECI don't have any mandate to invite the bids. On whose behalf they're inviting the bids? Why they're aggregating the demand when they have not got any demand requisition on the distribution company? The challenge is what Mr. Rajiv said. The challenge is the present regulatory tariff doesn't allow them to recover the entire fixed charges. In the distribution expenses, 20% cost is towards the normal admin salary and other consumer experience, digital transformation. 80% is power purchase cost. Out of this 80%, roughly 25% or 30% fixed charges they are paying to available capacity. If the regulator allows this entire 25% capacity pass to the existing customer, I'm not talking about future customer, then this issue is sorted. And then we can easily move to energy only markets. And the example is most of the advanced countries, once they allowed high renewable capacity to get into place, has moved to this market, be it Australia, be it Singapore, be it Japan, be it US, except Europe, which has a central global grid, like Mr. Rajiv said. And they are still in the energy capacity-based market. And why they are chosen energy-based capacity-based market? Because they have variable sources of power generation: nuclear, thermal, hydro, wind, solar, biomass, tidal, ocean wind, everything. So they are decided to be in capacity-based bidding because they have got, they got variable demand across Europe. At the same time, they got variable generation sources. They cannot move to energy only market. Whereas India, with a centralized grid, should move to energy only market. This is the point I'm trying to make here. I period my views here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ahuja, for emphasizing the energy-based bidding as one of the possible solutions to stabilize the system and to move towards expansion of the renewable energy sector. Mr. Singh, most of the panelists have supported your views on the push towards decentralized capacity generation Would you like to add anything in addition to this as a message to the rest of the community?
Let me tell you, international grid, what Mr. Das talked about, it is very important for India, but our neighbors' problems are great, and I don't think we'll be able to address it. Let me cite you one example, two examples, or three examples: connection with Bangladesh, connection with Sri Lanka, and connection with Pakistan. We had been working with Sri Lanka since 1996. I made 2 visits along with our prime ministers to pursue this matter. It happened at that point of time as if it should have been done yesterday. The day summit is over, it is postponed. Somehow it has materialized. It is a great achievement, not a small achievement. Nepal has a lot of hydro potential. We are doing tidbit of some export imports and all that. Bhutan is a really great success story, and we should pursue it. Pakistan, 1998, we were going to sign the agreement. On supply and chain side, it was being talked about that we have to import panels and all that. Let me tell you, it is a very pity story for India. On thermal front, systematically, for cheaper imports from China, we have killed all manufacturing companies, be it BHEL, L&T, or whichever private companies came up. So my humble solution is that don't wait for cheap import from China and neighboring countries. We have to, by hook or by crook, enter into manufacturing and strengthen it. And the other thing is that we have to again re-emphasize that participative management is needed for power sector. Unless you bring in poor, lower middle income group in the midst of decision making, and they should feel that they are also the owners, things will not be addressed. Whatever decision you take, because the business survives on making payments. If I don't have capacity to make payment, or I don't have mindset to pay, or there is no political will, then nothing will happen. And I think Mr. Neogi re-emphasized that there has to be dose of governance. People have to be rich or poor or middle income group. Today's social environment is that only middle class is supposed to be governed. The rich doesn't want to be governed. Poor, they say, what the hell? I have voting power. I have much more money than you, Mr. Rich or Mr. Middleman. I will vote for Mr. Ahuja if he suits me. I will not vote for Mr. Yogi, whatever he has. I will not. Arpit Singh, I will not. I don't like that face. I don't feel that he will be of help to me in future. So therefore, to conclude, we have to be participative management. There has to be dose of governance, and business community also have to be responsive. Let me tell you, I won't like to name. See, I'm more active than what I was in Power Grid. On thermal front, how much padding has been done in setting up power projects, and what is the quality of power projects some of big names in power sector have established. I'll leave it to you, Mr. Ahuja, Mr. Neogi, Mr. Das, you all come from private sector. Please find out, and if in person I can discuss, but not publicly. It is same on the part of private sector. It is same on the part of private sector. At least such participants should be weeded out. That is my feeling. I'm a little tough. I hope you won't mind. As an old man, I can afford to say this. Perhaps you have got future left. So,
Thank you, Mr. Singh, for your very frank and forthright views. With this, we have come to the end of the session. We have already actually overshot our time that was given to us. But I must thank all the panelists for their extremely valuable and insightful views. I have participated in a number of discussions, but I am fortunate to have participated myself in a discussion where the issues are very, very focused. And we have come to, there can't be a general conclusion in any debate like this. But of course, certain things are very clear, that we need to move towards a different kind of regime. It's not the financing only which is the real crux. It's the governance and the kind of systems that we want to build is the crux here. Mr. R.P. Singh, Mr. Neogi, Mr. Ahuja, and Mr. Das, all of them have referred to the point, to the view that we need to move towards a consumer-centric, a participative management in the governance structure. And a number of solutions have been suggested. Mr. Das talked about the reforms in the distribution, the distributor licensing, the tariff reforms, and Mr. Nyogi clarified that this will need a number of other governance reforms in form of dynamic pricing, mix of net and gross price, metering. Mr. Ahuja also supported Mr. R.P. Singh in the view that we need to move towards more consumer-centric distributed generation, and we need to move towards energy-based bidding to be able to push these reforms and support these reforms. So thank you very much. Once again, let me place my gratitude and thanks on record to all the panelists, and over to you, Priya.
So thank you all of you to have taken out the time and doing this with us. Open Media Network is extremely grateful to each one of you for have taken out the time for this discussion. At the end, I would like to extend my gratitude to our partners, CESC, and our knowledge partner, Terry. Thank you so much for your contribution and your time. Thank you.